What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty, and this is the Punk Rock MBA. And if you're like most people these days, you probably consume most of your music on some kind of streaming service. There's Deezer and Tidal and Apple Music and Amazon and tons of others, but by far the most popular one is Spotify, with over 430 million users across the globe as of this year. And if you look at your social media feed, you've probably seen tons of artists asking you to pre-save their new single, or getting really excited when they find themselves featured on one of Spotify's playlists because they know exactly how much that can do for their career. And yet, at the same time, you'll also see articles like this one, with the headline, "Does using Spotify make you a bad person?" And I can confirm, yes, using Spotify makes you literally Hitler. Even Taylor Swift wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal about how Spotify has devalued music and then pulled her entire catalog off the platform. Or as another example, the band Eve 6, who says that even though their song Inside Out has over 100 million streams, they've never been paid a single dime from Spotify. So what's the deal? How could Spotify be so wildly popular with both users and artists, and yet at the same time also despised by so many people in the music industry? First of all, does Spotify actually cheat artists? And if so, what can we do about it? And ultimately, did Spotify destroy the music industry as we know it, or did it save an industry that was already on the brink of collapse? I will do my very best to answer all those questions in this video. But first, if you haven't, please check me out on Twitch. I'm streaming twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4 to 7 p.m. Pacific, and there's a link to that in the description of this video. But first, I want to thank Eargasm for sponsoring this video. They make incredibly high quality earplugs in a wide variety of options. And trust me, if you aren't wearing earplugs to shows or band practice or anywhere else that there's loud noise, you absolutely should be. Because remember, you only get one set of ears. I personally won't go to a show without them, and honestly, I think music sounds way better with earplugs. They sent me a pair of these slide earplugs, which are magnetized and also include this connector cord so you don't lose them, and also this really nice metal carrying case so they don't get all gross in your pocket. I love the attention to detail. And also this collab they did with When We Were Young Festival. These are their high fidelity earplugs, which are a little bit more compact, but still really high quality, and also comes with one of these nice little carrying cases. I also kind of love this tagline here, even if you're in tears, protect your ears. Very good advice. So if you want to check these out or any of the other great products from Eargasm, just hit the link in the description of this video and make sure you tell them that I sent you. So in order to understand where we are today, first we have to understand how we got here. So I'm just going to give you a really quick, short crash course in the history of the music industry. The very first vinyl album was released way back in 1948, which really kind of kicked off the entire music industry as we know it today. The dominance of vinyl was followed by the cassette in the 70s and 80s, and of course the CD in the 90s and 2000s. Physical media was the king of the music industry for a solid half century or so, and the music industry was making a ton of money, reaching a peak of almost $24 billion per year in 2000. But as you can see from this chart, all of that changed with the introduction of a little computer program you may have heard of called Napster. Napster was the very first widespread option for music piracy, which you may remember from their beef with Metallica that did not end well for Metallica, especially Lars.
Maybe I wouldn't have to whore myself out if you kids didn't steal my music.
And Napster was followed by similar apps like Kazaa and LimeWire that nearly killed the music industry, cutting it to less than half of its peak by 2010. It was so dramatic that a lot of people back then honestly thought that it was just the end of the music industry. Like, well, that was cool while it lasted, time to get a real job. And they were dark days, but once Spotify and then later on Apple Music and all the other services came along, things started to finally get better again. The music industry has been slowly coming back year after year, and as of now, the industry is stronger than ever, with the overall health being back to where it was in 2002 or so, with streaming making up the vast majority of that growth. And out of all the streaming revenue that's brought the music industry back to health, Spotify itself is a huge chunk of that. They paid out over $7 billion in 2021 alone. That means that Spotify by itself makes up over half of the entire recorded music music industry. And because they don't have to pay for CDs and recording is cheaper than ever, it's actually a pretty great time to be in the music business. The big three major labels are pulling in over $19 million per day just from streaming. So the way that I see it, streaming didn't kill the music industry at all. Piracy had brought the music industry to its knees. Why would anybody pay for music when you could just go on Kazaa or LimeWire and download it for free? Even if that meant giving your mom's computer AIDS in the process. Piracy really did devalue music. Lars might be an asshole, but he was right about that.
Napster. Sharing's only fun when it's not your stuff.
And Spotify almost single-handedly saved the entire industry because compared to piracy, it was easier and safer to just pay $10 a month to stream whatever you want. And so the question you may be asking yourself is, well, if all of that is true, why are so many people unhappy with Spotify? And to answer that question, let me break down exactly how the financial side of it works. And I'm going to do my best to make this as simple as possible, but it is a little bit complicated, so please bear with me. So the first thing is, you may have heard people say things like Spotify pays artists 0.00001 cents per stream or whatever, and that is actually not true. There is no exact amount that Spotify pays artists per stream. The way that it actually works is, at least conceptually, pretty simple. Spotify takes all the money that they make every month from ads and subscriptions. They keep 30% of that for themselves, and they give the rest, which is about 70%, to the owners of all the music on the platform. But from there, it gets a little bit more complex. You might be asking yourself, how exactly do they divide up all that money across the millions of artists that are on Spotify? The amount that each individual artist gets paid is based on what percentage of Spotify's overall streams that they get. So if Spotify paid out $1 billion in royalties this month, and Drake was 10% of the overall streams for the month, then he gets a check for $100 million to put on his coffee table next to all his other $100 million checks. And again, there is no actual per stream rate, but generally speaking, the way that that works out is somewhere around $3,500 per 1 million streams. So to use the example I mentioned earlier, Eve 6, their song Inside Out has 140 million plays, which means that it's generated around $490,000 in streaming royalties just from that one song alone. Pretty amazing for a 20-year-old song, right? Spotify legitimately pays out a ton of money every year, and they always highlight this with examples of how many artists are getting paid a lot of money from the platform. For example, they claim that last year, over 1,000 artists got paid over $1 million each, and over 50,000 artists made over $10,000. So if Spotify is paying out billions, why do you still hear artists say that they get paid peanuts from streaming? Well, the answer to that question is one word: record labels. Okay, that's actually 2 words, but you get my point. Because the thing is that Spotify doesn't really pay musicians at all, per se. When they send out a check, that money actually goes to whoever owns the music, which is usually the record label. And so when you hear artists talk about owning their masters, this is what they're referring to, and that's why they care about it so much. So the label gets the money, and then the amount that they send the band depends on the details of their contract. It's called their royalty rate. And that amount can vary wildly depending on the contract, but generally speaking, it's somewhere around 15 to 25%. So let's say that you're in a band that gets 10 million plays on your new song. You're stoked, right? Because that is roughly $3,500 in royalties. But because that money goes to the label, the band only gets somewhere around $5,250, which they will then split 4 ways. Which means that after getting 10 million plays of their song, each member of the band is going to take home somewhere around $1,312.50. And to add insult to injury, then they have to pay taxes on that money. So when you hear artists say that they aren't making any money from streaming, they're not wrong. But at the same time, when you hear Spotify say, hey, wait a minute, we pay out billions of dollars every year, they're not wrong either. And so the part that nobody is saying, but what really gets to the heart of the issue, is that the money is mostly going to labels, not artists. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds of this because it gets really complicated as far as accounting and stuff, but it's actually even tougher than what I described for a lot of signed artists. Because when you hear that someone's signed to a major label for $1 million or whatever, that's not just free money. That is an advance against their future royalties. In other words, they more or less have to pay it back. They may also have to pay for the costs of promoting the album. For example, if you see a billboard advertising the album, or if they throw some fancy listening party with a bunch of overpriced sushi, it is very likely that the band has to pay for that. Paying back the label is known as recouping. And so getting back to the example of Eve 6 that I mentioned earlier, you may have asked, well, wait a minute, how have they not actually seen any of the money from this song? The alternative rock band whose 1998 hit Inside Out has over 100 million streams on Spotify is not recouped on its original contract and so earns nothing from streams of that song, said John Seibles, the band's guitarist. In other words, at least according to the label's accounting department, the band still hasn't paid back the original advance on those royalties. That sounds a little fishy to me. So why doesn't Spotify say all this when they get attacked in the media? Why don't they say, guys, what are you talking about? We pay out billions of dollars every year, but the money is going to the labels. So take it up with them if you're not happy. Well, to put it simply, Spotify won't do that because the labels just have too much power. For example, Universal Music Group alone, they're one of the biggest music publishers in the world. They own almost 25% of the entire global music catalog, and Spotify would be screwed if they pulled their catalog. And so the next question that you may be asking yourself is, wait a minute, why would anybody sign a deal like this where they only get paid a fairly small fraction of the royalties from their music? The answer to that is that a record label actually does a lot of things. At least they should. For example, they pay for recording the album. They also help with getting the artist on radio and on playlists. And at least back in the day with physical media, they would also produce the CDs and vinyl and get those into record stores. Now, in theory, artists could, of course, do all of that themselves, but a lot of them either can't or don't want to. They want the label to do that, and so they sign the deal in exchange for giving up a big chunk of their royalties. And beyond that, being a signed artist is a real badge of credibility in the music industry. Like, in theory, there's no reason why an independent artist couldn't be headlining one of the big music festivals. But in reality, that rarely happens because people in the industry think, well, if this artist can't even get signed to a label, why should I, as a promoter, take a chance on booking them to this festival? But getting back to the discussion of royalties, I should note that none of this applies if the artist is independent. In that case, the money from Spotify does go directly to them, which is why a small independent artist may actually make more money from Spotify than a much larger artist who is signed to a label and giving up so much of their royalties. For example, my friend Fatsy, who has made his full-time living from Spotify for something like 4 or 5 years now as a purely independent artist, despite the fact that he only has 142,000 monthly listeners, which in the grand scheme of things is not a huge number. He's not the smallest artist in the world, but he's definitely not big. His most popular song has about 3 million streams on Spotify, and yet he is paying the bills just from streaming, whereas Eve 6 has hundreds of millions of streams and apparently isn't making a dime from it. So really, what is the value of getting signed if you don't actually make any money? It's a question that I think a lot of people are asking themselves. And beyond that, if you do want artists to get paid more from Spotify, and why wouldn't you? What are the ways that that could actually happen? Well, the first thing you might think is, why doesn't Spotify just pay more? Maybe you've heard people say that they should raise their rate to 1 cent per stream, which does sound pretty reasonable because, it's 1 cent, right? But the problem is that they literally can't. If you look at their financials, the company made $2.9 billion last year, but they actually lost $197 million. Because remember, out of the $10 that you pay them every month, $7 of that goes right out the door to the labels, which leaves them $3 to pay for servers, engineers, offices, marketing, and everything else. So even if they wanted to pay more, which I'm sure they do, they literally can't. Like, the money is just not there. But there are a few ways that they could get there. The first thing they could do is raising prices, which would be totally fair to me. I think $10 a month is way too cheap to have access to almost every piece of music ever recorded, streaming whenever I want it. Personally, I would happily pay double that. But that's just me as someone who obviously listens to a lot more music than most people do, so that might not work. Because it's possible that by raising prices, a lot of people would cancel, and that could actually mean less money overall to pay out to artists. Another option they could do is to remove their free tier, which could make more people join premium Spotify, which could increase the overall pool of money that they distribute to artists. But on the other hand, that would also mean less access to music, especially for people with less income, which kind of sucks. And it would also mean less options for artists to get discovered because the total number of people on Spotify would be smaller. And remember that for as much as people talk about royalties and making money from Spotify, discovery is extremely valuable, maybe even more so. Because for most smaller artists, the hardest thing is just to get anybody to discover and care about your music in the first place. And the fact of the matter is that of all the big streaming music services, nobody is better at surfacing new songs or artists than Spotify. Getting placed on the right playlist can change a small artist's career almost overnight. Whereas the other platforms like Apple Music, Deezer, or Amazon Music really just aren't breaking new artists the way that Spotify is. Like if you ever heard someone say, we blew up on Amazon and that was the start of our career. And so to me, if the question is how can artists get paid more from Spotify and really all the other streaming services, the answer to that is pretty clear. It's the labels. And the best way to force labels to offer better contracts is to support independent artists. Because the more viable it is for an artist to be independent and do things on their own and exist without a label helping them, the better deal a label has to offer them in exchange for giving up that independence. So my suggestion is, if you're upset about the amount of money that artists are or aren't making on Spotify, take a few minutes out of your day to support independent artists. Stream their music, share it on your social media, buy some merch, go to their shows. Every time you do that, you'll be striking a blow in favor of artists. All right, my friends, that does it for this video about Spotify. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Also, I would like to thank all my patrons, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. I do giveaways, there's some members-only channels in my Discord that I'm super active in, and there's a way to have me review your music. All you need to do is join at the $10 and up level. Every month I do a call for submissions. If you want me to review something, just drop it in the comments of that post. Then I will review it live on Twitch for everyone to see. So if that sounds cool, hit the link in the description of this video. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.